Good afternoon or evening, everybody. Welcome to Celebrity Court of Public Opinion. Tanya Kelly, what's going on? Kenny Black, hey, Judge Al, hey. Lathea Robinson Smith, evening. Tonight is a special night. And I want to welcome you all back where tonight we're going to break down your favorite rap mogul and the decision of the jury. Listen, is he going to be wearing designer jumpsuit real soon or not? We're going to break it down tonight because we're diving deep into what might be the most scandalous split verdict of the decade. Sean P. Diddy Combs was found guilty on 2 counts of transporting women across state lines for prostitution, but he walked away not guilty on 3 bigger charges, including racketeering and sex trafficking. But hold on now. This is what makes the story very interesting. He was also denied bail today. So is the bad boy mogul about to become a jailhouse bird for real? All right, I'm Al Reynolds and I'm your host. And with me, I have 2 of our no-nonsense legal beagles joining us tonight this Wednesday. We have that fiery civil attorney, Shatan Turner, as well as civil attorney Jason Weiss. Welcome them both to the conversation tonight, to the Court of Public Opinion. Welcome, Shatan. Welcome, Jason.
Welcome, Your Honor. And we got Sean Carter in the comments as well. So,
all right, Sean, we'll take you in the chat. Be sure to bring up those good questions that you always usually answer. Okay, listen, we're going to do something a little bit different tonight. We're going to unpack the headlines. We're going to check out and read the shady jury dynamics. We're going to decide, is this the law or was it a loophole? Is this been damaging to the Diddy brand? And oh yeah, we want to know what you, the people, really think. I need you to hit that like button. Also, be sure to hit that subscribe button. If you're already subscribed, be sure to hit that share button. Drop down in the comments because you know we love your comments because it's about to get messy in here. All right, first up tonight, we're going to talk about the charges in the split verdict. So here are our receipts, all right? Count 1, racketeering conspiracy, he was found not guilty. Count 2, sex trafficking, which means specifically sex trafficking Cassie Ventura, he was found not guilty. All right, count 3, transportation for prostitution, Ventura, he was found guilty. Count 4, sex trafficking Jane Doe, he was found not guilty. But count 5, transportation for prostitution of Jane Doe, he was found guilty. All right, so here's the $1 million question that we're going to break down with the lawyers, and I want to hear what you got to say in the comments. He's convicted on moving women like cargo, but he's not guilty of empire-sized conspiracy. So I want to know, is this justice or is this jury gymnastics in trying to interpret what RICO really means? Some say it's a slap on the wrist, while others say the system did exactly what it was supposed to do in this verdict. But who's really shocked? Because what I've seen is that there has been a great deal of divide, even a divide within the Me Too movement. Some people are wearing T-shirts saying Free Diddy versus some saying Diddy did it. These are both trending. But let's go to our lawyers, and I'm going to start with you first, Jason. This is my question, I guess, as it relates to the verdict. How rare is it to see conspiracy, right? Because the conspiracy part of this, sex trafficking, and racketeering, that was thrown out, right? But the transporting of the prostitution, it ended up sticking. So how rare is this?
So first of all, let's go back a tiny bit. And the jury found that there was no criminal enterprise. That was the last part. So yesterday, when we were all watching this on pins and needles and waiting, that was the one. The RICO count was the one count that wasn't determined until this morning. And that came down when the judge read them what was called, I think it was called the Allen Act, which was, the judge basically saying, go back in that room and get a resolution. And that was the Allen instruction that was given yesterday. So the jury found that there was no criminal enterprise. And one of the commentators on the news said the jury found him to be a guy who was into Astroglide and lube, but not a mobster. And keep that in mind as I continue to go down. Now, not really a split verdict like people are saying. It's more like a finesse of the verdict, right? So in order to have the sex trafficking part, they really didn't meet that burden. The sex trafficking has to do with the distinction lies in legal thresholds. In order to have sex trafficking, we would have needed proof of force, fraud, coercion, in addition to the transporting of the victims. Here, the transporting of the victims, it was kind of a given, right? These people came across state lines. There's your transporting. There's your victim. The problem was force, fraud, or coercion. And it seems that the jury did not believe in this theory that the prosecution was putting on of trauma bond, which they were put through trauma, but they couldn't leave their daddy, no pun intended, or pun intended. So personally, I think the prosecution, they shot for what? Shot for the moon and landed on the stars. I think they shot for the moon and didn't even break through the atmosphere.
Right.
They overcharged this and they aimed too high. But again, that's the point. Across state lines have sex. They found yes, but coercion, fraud, and force, they found no. Mobster, they said no.
Okay, let's go to you, Attorney Turner. I don't know how they missed the coercion. I don't know how they missed the force. I can't see how a layman of the law did not find this to be an enterprise. That I can give a jury, because remember, juries don't understand the law. They understand how it makes sense to them and their experiences in life. What are your thoughts on these charges and the verdicts?
So, two things. I think that the jury bought the defense's closing argument when they said this was just a modern day love affair. A sick one, albeit a sick one, right? And the reason I say that is they had to conclude. You're like, how did they miss coercion? How did they miss that? They had to have concluded that both Cassie and Jane ultimately consented to the whole thing, right? And as a result, all of those other things fell away. Now, his lawyers, I remember you were critical about this previously when they were calling him a bad guy, right, during the trial. And you said you'd be mad if your lawyers did that. But I think that helped to take some of the wind out of the sails of the prosecution, because they weren't fighting them about whether he was an altar boy or whether he was an adulterer, right? They were fighting about whether or not he engaged in this criminal enterprise, like Attorney Weiss said, and they lost. The other thing I think about the Mann Act, which I think is interesting, and I wish Attorney Carter was here because that was his jam, but in essence, he got convicted for giving somebody a ride, right? When you think about it, it's transporting for the purposes of prostitution. And the Mann Act was passed in 1910, prohibits the interstate or foreign transportation of individuals for the purpose of prostitution, check, debauchery, check, or any other immoral purpose. How many immoral purposes did we see, right? That was the thing that was obvious about the evidence that they presented, that there were all of these bad things that occurred, all lubricated with baby oil and Astroglide, right? But what they failed to prove is that, and it's surprising, and I think there's a victim piece of it that we can get to it later. It's surprising given the raw emotion that was displayed by Cassie and by Jane that they didn't conclude the coercion, but what they concluded was they were, and Attorney Carter called it, they were in a relationship, they were dating, maybe some mean stuff happened, but doesn't that happen with everybody? And they liked it.
Well, Christine R. says she sucked so many penises that she had sores inside of her mouth, and Diddy wouldn't let her wounds heal before he made her do more free calls. But that counts for nothing. Okay, what are our thoughts on that, Attorney Weiss?
It's one opinion. It's one view. Yeah, that does count for nothing in the eyes of the jury. I think it's very telling that during this bail hearing, and it started, I think, at 5:05. It was supposed to start at 5 o'clock on the nose, but it started at 5:05. By 5:07 or 5:08 at the latest, he knew that he was being denied bail. So what does that say? That says that the judge didn't buy half of this stuff, right? The judge still found him to be a danger to society and himself. The judge didn't want to hear any of this. And right now, Diddy, as things stand, is going to be a resident of the Fed pen in the state of New York for another 120 days.
Until October.
October 3rd or 4th is the sentencing. Yeah.
Right. Attorney Turner, let me ask you this. With this, how do we feel, or how do you feel, or what does it say about how the prosecution laid out its case? What if you were a part of the prosecution team? What would you have done differently to get a different result?
The prosecution, and in particular AUSA Comey, has to be licking their wounds tonight and drowning their sorrows in something, because this was expensive to try. And from a budgetary perspective, since the person whose budget it comes out of ultimately is in the White House, and we know no matter what you think about his politics, he's a money guy. They bet the farm on getting convictions on something that wouldn't have even gotten him, jail time if these had been state offenses. As I heard somebody talk about earlier, if he had been in California and took a prostitute from downtown to Beverly Hills, he probably wouldn't even have gotten a hearing. They may have called it a misdemeanor, right? And so the fact that he got convicted of this, nobody would ever say at the beginning of this, we're going to spend this amount of money. They had hundreds, right, of federal agents raid his home in multiple jurisdictions. They have been working this case up in discovery. It's been weeks long of a trial. I've not seen the budget yet. I think he spent $15 million in defense costs. His money was well spent. But as taxpayers, somebody's going to ask some really difficult questions about how they spent this money, because it would suggest they were underprepared.
Attorney Weiss, at what point do you think the defense said, you know what, we don't need to cross-examine anybody? I mean, not cross-examine anybody. We don't need to put any witnesses up. I think we need to leave it right here, and we're going to get the judgment that they got. When do you think that happened in the trial?
Right before the prosecution closed. I think when the prosecution says we're done with our case, they probably went back and looked, and they said, you guys didn't meet your burden. And that's when they had a huge, powwow and sit down, and they made that decision. And I apologize. I was smiling. I know this is serious. I was reading a comment from Attorney Carter. Diddy would have gone free if he used local prostitutes. Freak local, not global. So,
yeah, but you know what? What's so interesting about that, I find interesting, is that is like hindsight 50-50, because that's what it came down to. I think the real case here, and I've said this earlier on in the coverage, is it's a jury trial, and you've got to convince that jury of RICO. You have to convince that jury, and that's where they fell short. I really felt that if I was a lawyer and understood all the legal terms, I would have completely got everything that the prosecutors were laying out and how they were trying to lay it out. Now, did they leave some loopholes in there, some undefined stuff? Abso-freaking-lutely. However, when you think about the average person understanding what they think words mean, because that's going to trump everything, right? And then the checklist that you're given to make sure that did they prove this beyond a reason of a doubt, right? That's where they lost this case. I feel like they never got over the hump of RICO and
So
enterprise.
I
I don't
apologize.
think we got over that hump with the jury.
So here's the thing, and Attorney Turner said it, and I had to quickly go back and just do a little bit of research and check my notes. She said that this was Diddy spent $15 million on this or whatever it is, or he spent whatever. But I remember a plea deal was offered to him before all of this. And I don't think the actual contents of the plea deal were made public. But what I'm pretty sure, and if you go on something like ChatGPT and you ask what was the rumored plea deal, it's going to tell you that the rumored deal, 5 years for a single count, and they would have dropped the other counts. So they were offering him 5 years for a single count and no sex trafficking, no racketeering. It would have been 5 years on a single count of what he was already found guilty of. 5 years.
All right, let's move this to real life right now. If you were on the jury, Attorney Turner, what would have been your vote?
Can I answer that in 1 second? I wanted to respond to what Attorney Weiss just pointed out, because in that respect, everyone's talking about the victory for Diddy's lawyers, but they made a huge mistake if that was the offer that was made, because the reputational damage that he suffered as a result of all the evidence that came out in this case, he'll never recover from that. Now, what that means doesn't mean that no one will ever work with him and he won't produce anybody. That'll remain to be seen. But who he's known to be after all of this evidence and who he was before this, even with the Cassie video, is very different. He had secrets he was trying to maintain. They've now been exploited. And I think that that's a huge mistake. And he would have had, all that money in his pocket. Now, getting to your question, how would I have voted if I was the jury? Like, it's hard for me sometimes to disconnect the fact that I am an attorney from just being a regular person. But I think that the low-hanging fruit that they got with the transportation for prostitution, that was easy. That was a slam dunk. I think that the enterprise crimes and the S trafficking, right? So the S trafficking, I really think the prosecution could have done a better job to drive those home. I think that the RICO, the reason that was complicated is because despite the fact that people are supposed to come into the jury box with, a clear head and they learn everything they need to know from the lawyers in the case that's presented, that's just not true. And everybody in their mind, when they hear RICO, they think Godfather. And they think John Gotti, and they
think R. Kelly,
or they think R. Kelly. But R. Kelly's in recent times, like the history of that law has to do with organized crime, and so in this case, I think they had the elements of it. But I think where the jurors couldn't wrap their mind around is that Bad Boy Records does not exist for the purposes of conducting freak-offs and for trafficking people for this. It exists to put out music. And so what they seemed to lack was like the checks, right? They lacked the other people, but they also lacked the checks. They lacked the proof that would tie that Bad Boy itself was existing for the purpose, or at least being used for the purpose of facilitate these freak-offs. What they portrayed was you had this freaky, potentially deranged, jealous boyfriend who wanted to expose these women to all of this nonsense and shenanigans, right? And it was him and not the enterprise. And that's where they fell short. So in that regard, my vote would be guilty for the transportation like they got. I think I probably would have been inclined for the sex trafficking, because I would have viewed the payments that the women got for their, livelihood. Cassie was on that contract for her records, but she never really did. And Jane was getting her rent paid. And I would argue that that was for the purposes of them being transported for sex. So I would have been inclined to go for the guilty on the S trafficking, but probably not on the RICO.
All right. How about you, Attorney Weiss?
From just based on the look, I said it from the beginning, right? I thought he was going to go ahead and he was going to beat the RICO. I thought he was going to beat the sex trafficking. So, from just watching this and listening and having my ear to the ground, this is what I basically predicted. And this is what I thought it was going to be. I also didn't think he was getting bail, which, everybody was challenging me on that. So I thought he was going to stay in, and I'm going to call it here on this show. I think he's going to get an additional 2 to 5 years. I do agree with Attorney Turner, though, that I think they didn't prove RICO, and I could have seen them possibly proving the sex trafficking for both of the women. I think it was possible, but there's just something the jury, they came back real quick on those.
Yeah, that was very fast.
Real quick
and long. So I knew something was not right. All right, let's go to the sentencing since you talked about it. Yeah. All right, the next up, the big elephant is, how long could Diddy actually do? Yep, do in prison. He faces up to 10 years per count. That's 20 years max. But with the $1 billion bankroll, superstar lawyers, and no priors, are we really going to see him behind bars? And if so, for how long? Now, some fans say he'll just buy his way out, but the feds, they don't play. Once you're convicted on a Mann Act violation, you're in their system forever. He's not just the king of Ciroc anymore. He's an actual convicted felon. So I'm going to throw to you, Attorney Turner. What's the realistic sentencing window? Do we see, or Attorney Weiss, because I know you were talking about this in the chambers. What's the realistic sentencing window? Are all 20 years or something less? If so, do they run them concurrently? And also, what does it look like as far as his time served already? Because, right now he would have been in prison for almost a year.
10 months. He's got 10 months, and if things stay the way they are, he's not going to have his sentencing hearing for another 4 months. That's because the Department of Corrections, they get 90 days to fill out their reports. Now, the Department of Corrections is its own standalone. They're going to give recommendations to the court and the judge. And it doesn't matter who this is or what's going on. This is now in the judge's hands. And if today's denial of bail is any indication, this judge is going to be giving him time. Chances are the two counts, which are 10 years each, they're going to run concurrent, meaning it's not going to be he serves 10 years on one and 10 years on the other. Chances are it's going to be that he's going to serve the 10 years total together at the same time. So he's really looking at 10 years. They're going to give him time served of a minimum of a year.
So you think they're going to give him 10 years, or you think they're going to give him 5 years?
I think he's going to get.
So what do you think he's going to have to serve is what I'm asking.
I think he's going to get up to an additional 5 years. That's about where I think it's going to be. I think
so you're saying
on October 3rd, he's going to be
5 years.
Yep, I think he's going to be October 3rd, 2030 will be his release date, somewhere around there.
Rumor has it that the debate between his lawyers and the prosecution is a 3-year differential, so that the prosecution has indicated that based on priors, not his, but just kind of case law, that it would warrant about a 62-month sentence. And his lawyers have argued that it would be a 2-year sentence, and they're trying to get time served and to get it commuted. However, the wild card is the judge. So the judge has the discretion to issue a sentence. And as Attorney Weiss indicated, this judge does not appear to be amused. And the other thing is that in federal cases, they may consider the totality of the evidence presented. And so as Attorney Weiss indicated, this judge appears to be influenced by all of what he heard, right? And even these things that he was acquitted on, he might consider as he was considering the flight risks and all that kind of stuff. Because think about it. You don't deny bail because somebody was transporting prostitutes. That doesn't make them a flight risk or a danger to the community. You're denying bail because you heard something that gave you the belief or gave rise to the inference that he was dangerous. So it's the videotape of him beating Cassie. It's all these people saying they thought he was going to unalive them. It's the totality of things that is making him think that, it's this. It is this, right? And
So how long do you think he's going to be in jail? What do you think the sentence is going to be, and how long do you think he'll have to serve?
I think Attorney Weiss is right. I think a maximum of 5 years, and it'll be interesting to see how hard his lawyers are able to persuade the judge. Because the other thing is that judges don't like to be appealed, and so even though he has the discretion, what he might do is give him 5 and not give him any credit for time served. And so that would be a way to kind of stick it to him, but still stay within the bounds of not being appealed.
All right, guys, lawyers, do you think his celebrity status played a role in this? Do you think it helped him or harmed him?
Having money helped him, because I'm telling you right now that a lesser person may have been convicted. Although if you think about it, his lawyers didn't actually do that much. So perhaps it didn't really matter because the prosecution didn't make a strong case. I think the biggest thing that his lawyers did, because remember, this wasn't in them presenting their case, but it was their influence, is getting the jurors to see 12 minutes of those freak offs, because you can't unsee that. And what I suspect, right, having been to parties in my life, right, is it looked like a good time. And that's the part that they probably couldn't reconcile, what the women were telling them on the stand and what they observed. So what they may have thought, and one of my cousins told me this, he said, just because you regret it later doesn't mean it was coerced, right?
Well, no, I think the reason why they showed the videos, one of the reasons they showed the videos is because like our guest that was on the show, RICO, told us, he uses the freak offs as an opportunity to kind of like direct you. So he tells you what to do. He tells her, when to perform oral sex. He tells her when and what to do. So I think they were using that as an example of the coercion. Like he was forcing them to perform oral sex. He was forcing them by telling them to do certain acts, and they had to perform those acts. All right, let's jump really quickly because I want to talk about what we touched on, which was why the bail was denied and what this judge is actually saying. So if I heard you guys correctly, they aren't. This was more of a message being sent than it was about him being a danger to society, right? I do see him as a flight risk. I can still see him being a textbook of a flight risk. But do you think that the judge's decision to deny bail was a message about where he stands on the case in the sentencing? Is that what I heard you guys talking about earlier?
I think it gives the message that he's not amused. He doesn't want to be accused of allowing fame and wealth to influence him. And
so why not home arrest?
Because it's more fun than jail, right? He goes home. So the other thing from an optics perspective, if Diddy left that courtroom, it was going to be mayhem, and they were going to act like he was the second coming, right? And he was going to have his hands up, and it was going to look like a victory. And I think the judge wanted to deprive him of that opportunity. That's what I think. This is serious. Yeah, this is serious. You're going back to jail, and this isn't a party. There will be no freak off now, right? And so I think that ultimately, however the judge plays this with the sentencing, this denial was his attempt to equalize things. Because, like I told you, I think this is a real problem for victims. I think that this verdict will have a chilling effect on people wanting to cooperate with the prosecution, because for those lawyers, and as a lawyer who does kind of sensitive issues, for lawyers, it's their job, right? For those women who testified, it was they took their lives in their hands by coming out against somebody who had proven to be a monster. And say what you want about them, they believed that they were coerced. They believed that he was going to unalive them, and they believed that he was going to hurt people that they love. So the fact that they stood up in open court and told the world what he had done to them when they had never had the courage before, they only did it because those prosecutors gave them the impression that it was going to be worthwhile because he was going to do hard time. They wouldn't have done it for 2 to 5 years. They would have kept
Absolutely
their mouth.
not. I don't think so. I agree with you on that. I don't think anybody would have testified.
And here's the other thing, right? His own lawyers came out and said he is not a good person. So I'll bet you I wasn't in the courtroom and I haven't heard, but I'm sure we could find out if the judge threw that back in the faces when they were asking for him to be released. Counselor, you said your client's not a good person. I can't release him. I wouldn't be shocked if that was a factor in him keeping him. And plus, look, this judge knows he was sentencing him to some sort of incarceration, and it's going to be more than time served, be it be 4 more months, be it be 10 more years. No matter what, this judge was going to make sure he's getting more time. So why send him home under house arrest to have to get him back in? Let him serve his time now. And look, maybe he says, while you were waiting the next 4 months and the 10 months that you already served, time served, now you can go home. Let
me ask you this. So, okay, when we find out the sentencing, will the defense appeal the sentencing?
I think the defense will appeal the sentencing if it's anything except time served. That's what I think. If it's time served and now you're free to go, goodbye, there's no point in appealing. If it's time served and, and here's an additional 5 years, yeah, they're going to appeal.
This is why I think this case is so interesting if I was still teaching law school, because this case exemplifies the limits of the Constitution and what the rights are. Because what it's going to come down to is, will he be convicted or will he be imprisoned for his actual convictions, or will other things influence it? And even though judges can consider evidence presented that was acquitted, I think it does present a real problem. And that's what I think will be appealed by his lawyers, because his lawyers are going to say he got convicted of giving 2 people a ride, right? He got convicted of driving a car, basically. This is transportation for prostitution, right? That's the conviction. All this other bad stuff that you know about, that is not before you, right? That is not what should influence how long he stays in prison. And so this judge really has a challenge, because judges are human, right? Judges are within the bound of the law, but they're human. And I think his decision today on denying bail shows you that he's not amused and he wants to come in as hard as he can, but his hardness, or the duration of the imprisonment, has to be tempered by the actual convictions, because if it's not, then they're gonna appeal it and they're going to win. And so if his real goal is to have him serve time, then he needs to come in on the conservative side, in my opinion.
Got it. All right, let's talk about innocent or not guilty. All right, let's get this into the words people twist. Not guilty does not equal innocent. I just want to make sure that we understand that. The jury is basically saying, when they issued the not guilty, is that we have doubts, meaning you did not convince us. So do the headlines lie when they say Diddy beat the big charges, or did the jury just not buy the prosecution's version? Well, social media is torn. Some think he's an innocent man set up by gold diggers. Others say he's the kingpin who danced his way through loopholes. But remember, in the real court of law, the burden of proof is on the state, and there you have it. But here in the court of public opinion, the burden of proof is whatever's trending. So let's go to you, Attorney Weiss. How do you explain not guilty versus innocent to an average person?
In in the confines of the law, there's no such thing really as innocent, right? It's not guilty. They needed to prove certain facts in order to go. So look at it as like a checklist, right? In order to be convicted of the S trafficking, he needed to do certain things, right? You needed to, by force, coercion, or fraud, transport someone over state lines for the purpose of having relations with them, right? So did they force, did they coerce, did they go question mark? Did they go over state lines? Check. Did they have relations? Check. Now you go back to the question mark. Well, they kind of said yes to it, and originally they said yes, and they changed their mind, and they did this. So I don't think they met that factor. I don't think they did it. That just means you're found not guilty because you didn't meet the factors. You're not innocent because you weren't there. You'd be innocent if it wasn't me, right? I'm not P Diddy. I'm X Diddy, right? You got the wrong person. Then maybe you could be innocent. But in order to be found not guilty, that just means that the state or the prosecution did not check all the boxes. And that's literally what this jury was given, a check sheet. You go in there, did he do this? Yes or no? You don't have, well, maybe, and because of whatever, and nope, that's a no. And that means not guilty.
Got it. All right, so this is like the jury versus the law and who really decides. So
jurors always control. That's the thing. As anybody who's tried cases will tell you, the jurors are in charge, and you never know what they might do.
And the scariest thing is a jury trial, because you never know. You could walk into that courtroom and I could be wearing a blue jacket like I'm wearing today, and the juror could say, oh my God, my ex-husband used to always wear blue jackets and I don't like you, so that means I don't like your client, and no matter what you're saying, I'm not going to do it, and your client, guilty, guilty, guilty.
All right, let's get into it. The jury isn't just 12 strangers. Many people are saying they're the ultimate deciders. Now, the DA can scream from the rooftops and the defense can poke a million holes, but the final say is always the 12 people in that box. So, of course, there's human bias, there's emotion, as well as confusion. That's our system. And that's the kicker. The same law that can ruin you can save you if 12 people feel it should. And in this case, that's exactly what happened. Was the jury fair? Who knows? Bias? Were they bought into his celebrity, or were they just regular folks saying that the state didn't deliver receipts? Let's go to you, Shaitan. What role does emotion play for a jury in a case this big? And do you think it was played in this one?
Jurors are human. And so that always factors in any case, regardless of the size. As Attorney Weiss indicated, jurors are influenced by fashion. Jurors are influenced by the perceived wealth of the lawyers. Jurors are like, I know, like when I used to go to court, I used to make sure I didn't have anything flashy, right? It was always understated, to focus on what I was saying, not on me, nothing too short. There's still, at least there was when I got out of law school, I haven't checked it lately, but there were jurisdictions where women couldn't wear pants. I went to law school in South Carolina, and this was not in like olden times, this is modern times, but because the court thought that that's how female lawyers should look. So there is a gamesmanship and an element of theatrics in trying cases. Fun fact, Dr. Kevorkian's lawyer, I had a case against him years ago, and he had a big blowout, and he came to Pittsburgh on this private jet, and we don't roll like that here. He was all buffed and shined, and he had mascara, as my partner said. Yeah, it was, he had stuff on his eyelashes, but yeah, it was just enough. He was glam, right? But when I researched him, it turned out that he had been a drama major in college. So he went to law school, but he brought his full theatrics and drama to the courtroom. And that's what made him such a skilled trial lawyer, because he knew how to present and conduct himself in a way to connect with the jurors. So all of that shows you that people are human. They pick a side. They're supposed to only be influenced by the facts, but everybody who's ever tried a case knows that it has a lot to do with whether or not they like you, whether or not they like your client. Now, in this case, I think actually the fact that they hated Diddy probably was helpful, because that's why his lawyer said, well, he's a bad guy, because they could tell that on their face they had disgust. And so what his lawyers indicated is, you don't have to like him in order to find that he didn't control a criminal mastermind or an enterprise that existed for the purposes of committing crimes. You don't have to like him in order to find that he didn't actually make these girls do these things. They were having a good time. You saw the video. Like, sure, he beat her later, but if we're talking about this S trafficking, that wasn't, about S trafficking. And so I just think that, yeah, if you're, for all the algoritors who might want to go to law school, recognize that you have to pay attention to whom you're trying to communicate and convince of your side as much as you have to do on the facts. That's why people don't just file briefs and have it get decided by paper.
All right, really quickly, Jason, before we move on, really quickly, if you were the judge, would you have handled jury instructions differently?
I'm probably not. I mean, the jury instructions, they're pretty standard, right? The prosecution puts on what they want heard, the defense puts on what they want heard. They get all of this outside the presence of the jury, and they come up with the jury instructions. They're standard jury instructions. You don't get much in the way of, making it crazy or making it, what you want. You don't really get to fine tune them. You get to narrow them so that they apply to your case. But in reality, you deliver it. And the judge does have some discretion on, in this case, how he delivered it, what he said, how he explained it. He may have said something along the lines that, RICO is not only for the mobsters. What you see on The Sopranos doesn't mean that is RICO and all of this. He could have thrown something in, and this is what I was going to say. You want to find out really about how a jury operates and all of this. Watch Runaway Jury. Watch My Cousin Vinny. Those are how, people can relate. I think the jury instructions, they worked on this for a long time, defense and prosecution. Again, I think the prosecution overshot with the RICO, and RICO is just hard for the average person to understand if it's not someone who is, tied into the mafia.
Yeah. All right. Let's
and
close
one
this.
more thing about the jury instructions I was going to say, to Attorney Weiss's point, the reason they're so carefully crafted is because they can be appealed on the fact that the jury instructions were improper. And so everybody tries to keep it really tight, at least from the prosecution perspective, because they don't want that to be a reason that the case could potentially get overturned.
All right, family, let's call it what it is. We got 2 felony convictions. I know someone in the chat asked, will he be a convicted felon? Well, we have 2 felony convictions. We have 3 walkaways, and we have a judge who said, hell no to you getting out on bond. Sean Diddy Combs just became the first hip-hop billionaire to trade the Ciroc spotlight for a federal booking number. Yet half the timeline is tossing him like he just dropped No Way Out 2. They are really on his side. Tonight, we learned something ugly but undeniable, and that is the law is a rule book, but a jury is a vibe check. 12 strangers didn't need to prove sainthood or damnation. They just had to feel a doubt, and their doubt is what they felt. And that sliver of uncertainty split a potential life sentence into maybe what we talked about tonight, which would be maybe 5-year bid. So here's your homework for all the algoritors and people who are watching the Court of Public Opinion. Answer me this. Did justice bend or break? Was this a triumph of reasonable doubt or a billionaire buying daylight? Number 2, will the sentencing judge flex or fold? Is he gonna, if he didn't buy it, is he gonna really show us that he didn't buy it by extending the sentence? 20 years max is on the table. A slap on the wrist could ignite a cultural riot louder than any Bad Boy remix if you leave it to the Me Too movement thinkers. Number 3, what's the real reason for 2025? Are we watching the fall of a mogul or the proof that fame still negotiates its own terms? I need everybody drop down into the comments, sound off, and let us know your rawest take. No PR filters and no NDAs. Jury, did they nail it or did they fail us? Is he going to go to prison for a long time or get a slap on the wrist? Is the system really working, or is the system still up for sale if you have great lawyers? Remember, the next headline is already loading, but tonight you hold the gavel. Smash that like, slam that subscribe, and share this with anyone who thinks power can't hit a courtroom ceiling. I'm Al Reynolds, and I'm the host of Here, the Celebrity Court of Public Opinion, and the spotlight just followed Diddy from the limelight to the lockup. This will conclude tonight's show. Court is now adjourned. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment and share, because the gavel might drop in the courtroom, but the gossip never stops, and we want to hear it. Everyone, have a great night.